Howdy, gang. I had this video idea lying around for a while, and I figured in the wake of the sample teams video, this would be a good time for it. You know, striking while the iron head is hot and all. Yeah, I also realized the last couple of videos have not been the most visually stimulating, so if you're just listening, then you're not losing anything. But if you want to look at something on the screen, I dug through some old replays and I found this excellent old tournament best of 3 against McMegan from the end of 2019. So there you go. Anyway, I was surprised that people were so passionate about the sample teams thing. I understand why, of course. You know, I get how it can come across as almost an act of hostility, I guess is one way you might phrase it. Which, of course, is not the intention, but obviously, I don't begrudge anyone their, strong disagreements, of course, that's your right, and it's also your right to express it as intensely as you like. Who am I to tell anyone to not passionately engage in discourse? That's my favorite thing to do. So, even if I disagree with a lot of it, then, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. Yeah, a lot of people were saying, well, if good people or good players can lose to, newer players that are just spamming sample teams, doesn't that just make Pokemon a bad game? I saw this sentiment a lot. And the answer is yes. Of course, that's like part of the problem. In Peng's post, in that thread he made, then he said that, yeah, like a lot of this does come from the fact that you can level the playing field. Yes. So, and that kind of leads into the big question here, what we want from competitive Pokemon, because it's going down so many rabbit holes, from here, but I'll start with one. So he was specifically referring to Black and White, where if hyper offense is in the equation, then games end very quickly. And so the game can spiral out of control without there being much to be done about it, especially with how difficult it is to cover everything in terms of matchup, with how many varied archetypes, good archetypes, there are in Gen 5. So it is very feasible. So obviously I agree with the sentiment of, if there's like this polarizing hyper offense stuff, shouldn't we do something about it tiering wise? But then you get to the problem of, how you can't just tier stuff. It's not that easy, because the biggest subject now in Black and White seems to be Volcarona for the millionth time, and getting something done about it is a challenge. I am wondering how much of this sample team's problem being a tangible thing is a Black and White thing, of course, versus how much of it is a general Pokemon thing. But it kind of leads to the other point that I saw, which was that people were saying, it's like, doesn't this just make it harder for new players, because there will be the players who just get handouts from their well-connected team-building friends? And the thing is that, I think I even mentioned it in the video, I don't like that either. I really dislike that. It's like the samples and I understand that like it makes it harder, of course, for the newer players. But, if I had my way, because I realize I'm speaking in idealism, I don't expect sample teams to get kneecapped or anything like that. If I had my way, then there would be something done about people being fed teams from others as well. I'm not saying, you must always use a team you yourself built with no external assistance whatsoever. I mean, that's ridiculous. But obviously there's no, I don't have a clear line in the sand on what is and isn't acceptable, for talking about our honor or whatever. But I think it's more of a know it when I see it, because there are players who can't build, and I don't know, again, it does kind of beg the question, what do we want from competitive Pokemon? Because you'll see some players say things like, well, why should I be at a disadvantage because I can't build? It's like, well, if you're if you can't understand the game at that level, then yes, you should be at a disadvantage. And the follow-up argument on this subject, or discussion on the subject, that popped up on Discord afterward was, I don't know if all the points that were being made were being taken entirely in good faith, which, I mean, shocker, competitive Pokemon debate has bad faith interpretations. But, like, the idea is that with the low skill ceiling in Pokemon, then skill checks are important. And I don't know. I almost don't even want to rehash it because, good lord. I'm not backtracking on anything. It's just there's only what it's kind of like. It's kind of like complaining about bad CGI in big Marvel or Hollywood movies. It's like there's only so much you can complain about it before it's like, yeah, which is kind of lame because then it's like, well, they almost get away with it that way if they just kind of wear you down into submission. It's like, well, what do you want me to say, that the CGI was plastic and terrible once again for the millionth time? Like, good lord. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to make, this really surprised me actually, was that some comments I saw were saying like, hey, don't you make movies? Aren't you learning from the, old masters? And it's like, well, yes, but that's to make something new. And I have a very particular example of this in mind, actually. But I like the sample teams obviously as an idea for people to learn from, for sure. But the thing is, I don't think that they really... I mean, look, I know it depends on the person, right? A player who really wants to improve and learn how to build their own teams and all that is going to do that with the sample teams. But the kind of player I have in mind that I was speaking against is the one that never has to... that won't do that because they don't want to, and this lets them get away with that. They are able to never build and still compete at a high level. And there's this sort of expectation like, yeah, I've never played this tier before, but I should be on equal footing with... I understand that, of course, there's a million positive applications for sample teams. Knowledge is good, but the problem is that the knowledge is not being used for learning. It's being used as a shortcut to an end result, which is, winning. And that also goes back to the question of, what we want from competitive Pokemon, because so much of the discourse and the social factor surrounding this wonderful game is around the competitive aspect. This player's better than that player. This player needed to do this, and it's competitive. But so many of the decisions we make about our tournaments, about our tiering, are not competitively minded. A lot of them are, first of all, people, really hate change. People really love the status quo because it's comfortable. And identification, I won't go down that rabbit hole too far. Reminder to yourself, I got to go back to the movie thing. But now I just got lost with the point I was trying to make. Let me get back to it. Yeah, the players who will just succeed without having to actually learn for themselves. That's what I'm speaking against. I, of course, don't have a problem with people, learning from... What are the videos I make about? But that's the whole point. I would like the samples to exist in a form that is more conducive to, teaching and learning, and not in a way that's basically like, well, here's the shortcut to be as well off as, whatever SPL player. Oh, that does remind me, actually. A lot of people saying, oh, one-sided open team sheet, and, well, it's a sample, so you can look at the information. I feel like they just did not get to that part in the video where I said, well, these are... First of all, you can't know that, because the set of 6 Pokemon doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the sample. And because the set of 6 Pokemon that is in the samples could just be someone else's different team. So you cannot assume that. That can really, really burn you. But more importantly, the point is that, yes, those teams are built by, the best in the game, and then and they work even if you know that they're coming. A great example, actually, is that Empo, one of the very, very best ever, strong argument for the best, then a lot of the teams he uses are not exactly, I'm not saying they're copy and pasted each time, but they're very, very similar to each other. And a lot of the time, they're not really catching you off guard in terms of surprise, based on what I've seen recently. Someone feel free to correct me. But if it's not Empo, there's a lot of other players like this, where it's like, well, they're using that again, shocker, but it doesn't really make that much of a difference, because the team is so good and it lets them play the game and all that. So, yeah, and again, what do we want from competitive Pokemon? Because it feels like a lot of the stuff that is more competitive, I realize there has to be a line in the sand somewhere, because this is a hobby and not, a paid esport, but a lot of the stuff that is more skillful, competitively minded, things like that, a lot of those things tend to get looked down on. I'm talking best of 3 and building your own team, stuff like that. So, I don't know, there's a lot of really frustrating contradictions, and I think I've talked enough on this channel about the game often being a pretense for the pseudo high school dynamics on display, and the embarrassing nastiness that gets thrown around at someone who might not have set up Stealth Rock on an opportune turn, to put it mildly. But yeah, to get back to the movie thing, don't you make movies? Yes, new movies, hopefully. Nothing that you could just write off as a rip-off of XYZ, even if you can see the influences. And the point I have against, perfectly procured samples is, well, why would I build my own team when I can just use ABR's, perfectly calibrated, masterwork that will get me further than if I would use my own team? I'm not saying, look, practicing with ABR's team is great, but there's also no reason to ever go beyond just using ABR teams, And if you think I'm exaggerating, there are players, successful players, like Smogon Tour finalists, who have gone so far exclusive. Like, how I used to sum up their play style whenever I was facing them? I was like, oh, this guy only uses insert other player here teams. Like whoever, one of the top players of the time whose style they like the most, they would literally just be, a knockoff version of that. So it's like, oh, well, if I'm facing this player, I'm going to be facing, ABR team. So that. And then you would face an ABR team, So you can, they would be very successful. If you say, oh, well, that's not fulfilling. Look, clearly, I'm talking about the bottom line of the competitiveness, which is what interests me. A lot of people say, oh, we're just here to have fun. And it's like, well, fun is very subjective. To some people, using UUs and Ubers is fun. For me, the fun part is finding the optimal way to be competitive and successful. So that's what I based a lot of my tiering and tournament opinions on, which is why I hate things like Scald, for example. Yeah. What else was in there? Yeah, so the point is that the sample, if you want to use ABR's teams to learn, that's great. Of course, there's so much you can learn from ABR's teams. And I realize this is not really a solvable problem, and it's more about the people involved, and and then you get to the other question about what you want out of competitive Pokemon. Do you want to look at the end result, or do you want to look at how the game is played? Because people will often talk about, it's always about how the game is played, but then they'll only recite the results from a sheet, and if you watch them comment on an actual game that's happening in real time, they're very, very clueless. They're very quick to jump to general absolutes, and, I'm a nuanced kind of guy. I love debating the nerdy details to an obnoxious degree, and if that's not really your thing, that's fine, but I don't know. So that's why I keep coming back to that question of what do we want out of this, because a lot of people do just want the social media outlet where they have the right to be nasty to other people, because that's fun and cool. And personally, I really dislike that kind of behavior, which is why I'm so against it. And then a lot of people who behave like this are like, why don't you let me have fun? Sorry, they would rather say, do you just hate fun? What's the matter with you? because it's a personal defect to not like that kind of behavior, apparently. I don't know. I know people have fun in different ways, but it's so much of it often comes at the expense of someone else. And to come back to the teams being passed around, there's so many people. I mean, forget these Smogan Tour playoff participants who have successfully copied ABR's teams to success. Even when the opponent knows that the ABR teams are coming, and they're not even being used by ABR, then it still works. ABR makes great teams, of course, but this player, were they left to their own team building, would almost surely not be as successful. Or maybe they would. We'll never find out. But that's one thing, because a lot of the time, these players were not getting these teams from others with permission. They were just copying it from replays. Which, by the way, if you really want, all the teams in the world, think of all the public replays there are, and of the best players duking it out. Then I saw a comment that was like, well, I won't have their EV spreads, and I won't have unlimited, I won't know the unrevealed moves. And see, I would almost rather, or actually, I would much rather newer players, actively try to copy teams from replays, because then you have to figure out what's going on. You have to do some calcs to figure out EV spreads. You have to say, oh, well, I didn't see what move that was. I wonder what it is. You know what? I'm going to try move X and see how it works for me. And if it doesn't work for me, then I guess I'll try something else. That's how it works. And I know a lot of people just want to click and chill, as one player called it. But the problem that I find anyway is that when you make it too easy to just click and chill, you nullify a lot of what is considered skill out of the game. I don't know. Team building is such an important aspect, and if it gets glossed over, the only time that debate's happening. So yeah, the movie thing. I'm all for being inspired by old movies. And, since I'm a major movie history nerd, then, if I see a movie, I can probably tell what influences it's coming from. It's like, oh, that was inspired by this and this and this. But a great movie, even if you can see the influences, then that movie is still very much its own. And I'll actually give an opposite example of what I would dislike. If you're trying to... okay. One of the best movies ever is Vertigo. There's no two ways about it. It might be the best movie. It's certainly one of my very favorites. And it was directed by a guy named Alfred Hitchcock, who you might not have heard of. But yeah, famously, Alfred Hitchcock had an American disciple named Brian De Palma, who came of age movie-wise in the 70s and 80s. Made a lot of huge movies like Carrie and Scarface that you've definitely heard of. For my money, his best film is Blowout, which is really extraordinary. And he's got a lot of great ones, but he's also got a lot of stinkers. And one of these stinkers came in I want to say it was 76, and it was called Obsession. And it was scripted by Paul Schrader, who also is famous for writing Taxi Driver and directing some other great movies like Mishima and First Reformed. When Schrader is writing things like Taxi Driver or First Reform, you can see his influences. The guy worships Robert Bresson and Pickpocket, among many others. But I think he really loves that the French film The Fire Within by Louis Malle, and there are all sorts. But he's a Bresson kind of guy. He's a Bergman kind of guy, but mostly Bresson. But you can see those influences in Taxi Driver, and also thanks to Scorsese's direction, then you see how it goes somewhere else, and becomes its own thing. This is true for so many great films. Yeah, and I have one more Pokemon point to make after this, actually, that I was just reminded of. Anyway, so yeah, but with Obsession, Schrader and De Palma, they literally just remade Vertigo, and I don't think it was a very imaginative remake, and I really, really wound up disliking that film. Maybe I should give it a revisit or something, but that's the kind of thing I don't like. They worship Hitchcock, and then they just remade a Hitchcock film. Watching Obsession when Vertigo exists, I don't know. And that, I hope you can see the parallel. Now, De Palma made a ton of films that were so directly inspired by Hitchcock that they where is the sample teams thread here? So inspired by Hitchcock, they bordered on, plagiarism at times. But it was more, he really made those films his own. Sisters is one. Body Double is one. Body Double and Dress to Kill, they are like literally Hitchcock's greatest hits in terms of, plots tossed together. Psycho, Rear Window, Vertigo, of course. There's some others in there as well, but those are the big guns. I don't think he ever really did an homage to North by Northwest, if I'm remembering correctly. Where are these? There they are. They were right in front of my face because I was thinking about De Palma. Anyway, I like those because those are the clear point of inspiration made his own, right? But Obsession, I thought, was just completely its own thing. So hopefully the point is clear. If I wanted to make a GSC thief team, I'm sure it would look very much like Case's team. Is it not in here? Why is it not in here? Oh, no, it's not. Where did it go? Thief Executor. Okay, whatever. It might have been taken out at this point. Basically, if I wanted to make a thief offense team, I'm sure it might look like this Executor Espion one, right? But I would try to make it my own. And that is what I think samples are good for. But if I wanted to play GSC at a high level, if I was familiar with this here, I could just cycle between these teams and do very, very well. If I played well, which of course that's important, but I should like to think that we could strive for something else. Now, the thing I wanted to get to here, I really like how the GSC sample teams thread is set up because, as you see here, the team is not just presented but explained. And this is really important because, you know what a good way to look at it is? I saw someone say this. It was teach a man, it's the old expression, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, right? So if you just throw teams at someone, then they, can learn through using sample teams, but you teach them to fish better if you don't, not team fishing, haha, oh, do I really need a Snorlax counter on this team? No, but you teach them to fish, metaphorically speaking, better if you explain what happens here. And then you get into the abstractions of, not literally this team and in this iteration always, but hey, you know what? This Nidoking could run, I'm just going to make this up on the spot, could run Morning Sun, over Thunder, or it could run Lovely. Actually, I'm almost surprised it doesn't have there's no sleep move on this team. So you could have a sleep move on Lax or Gengar or Nidoking if you wanted. See, that's what I mean. Giving players the options and letting them choose. That is what I'm for. And here are the options. You can use this move. You can use that move. This is better for this, but on this team you might want that because this. However, you see. If the player, so I'm not against sample teams, I would instead like this kind of model where you have these offensive teams, these teams which are explained, hey, this is how the team's supposed to work, which also, actually this helps the player even more, and they're not just clicking the buttons and hoping it works, they're not just clicking Quiver Dance or whatever equivalent and hoping it works out, but they're like, hey, this actually... Now it makes sense. And then when they figure that out, then they understand the tier better, and then they can really participate on it, as opposed to just being a tourist who's trying to grab some wins for whatever reason. There's nothing wrong with being a tourist, but competitive game, and at the end of the day, that is, what do we want from competitive Pokemon, etc. Keeps coming back to that. So yeah, you can, obviously the moves... Yeah, I would go further with this and just say, this Nidoking could run Fire Blast on this team, or Flamethrower, because Heracross is actually kind of annoying. That's actually true, I didn't just make that up. So if Heracross is annoying you want more coverage against Fortress, that would be very useful, actually. Then yeah, give Fire Move Nidoking a shot. Explain things like this. You can try this, here are your options, you make the call. Make the like great cinema, leave the final result in the mind of the viewer. Make them think about it. Make them decide. It can be difficult, of course, but it should be difficult. And some people were like, well, is it good for players to lose in round? It's like, well, it's part of the experience. And oh God, what was it? Someone was saying that tiers without good sample teams don't have as many players playing them. It's like, well, how much do you need? I don't know. I don't want to call that entitled necessarily, but it does feel like I don't know. I'm not saying new players should have it hard. I'm saying new players should not be coddled. And if someone's going to say, well, I won't play this tier if they don't have sample teams the way I want them, then what, do you run after them and say, oh, no, please come back, please, we need you to save this tier, so we'll do it. I don't like that. And it's just in the same way I don't like in the past how tiering processes have involved things like, oh, well, we don't want to make this band too complicated because that would really deter new players when mechanics are a lot likelier to do that. And it's like, if someone's going to get deterred by something as simple as that, it's like, really? That's who we're catering to? As opposed to the players who make the game what it is? Yeah. Oh, and the last thing, this really bugged me. I mentioned that I dislike AI for the same reasons, for similar reasons to the sample things. And a lot of people were like, how is this like AI? And I'm like, okay, it's obviously not the same thing. Good Lord. I dislike it because people will make quote-unquote AI art, or AI quote-unquote art. And, God, these GSC symbols are really good. They're telling you how to use each poke. Oh, this is wonderful. I know a lot of people don't want to learn. They just want to, get the result quickly. But, that's what I support. That's what I value in the game. So that's what's happening here. Anyway, so for AI quote-unquote art, which, repulsive, then that's what I dislike. It's like, well, I don't want to, I'm not creative, but I want to make art, so AI will do it for me. I just tell it what I want, and then oh, no, disgusting. So I'm 100% certain on that. And then someone was like, oh, what's wrong with AI? And I'm like, I don't think, oh boy, yeah, I think that's a whole different can of worms, obviously. Anyway, that's basically everything I wanted to say. So look, actually, someone also had the really good idea to putting like sample replays. Like, hey, here's the team, here's how it functions. So, God, I mean, of course, this is GSC where there are fewer options to consider. There's not EV spreads, things like that. Or abilities, or natures. But, I mean, I think we could absolutely do it. So, you know what? I think the next video is going to be, or if not the next, because, tomorrow I might feel like doing something else. But I think another video I'd like to make in the near future is to go back to these, the DPP samples I mentioned in the last video as well. And go over, what's good about them and what you could change on them. But really leave it to you, because look, I'm not going to stop you from copy pasting this this Emerald team that August revamped as it is. But I'm saying if I were to use it, I would consider these things. And yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it boils down to, yeah, if you want to be good at Pokemon, you have to invest some time in it. And I guess a lot of people just want to, jump in and click and be on the same playing field without investing the time, which I know it's a hobby and everything, but again, what do we want from it? And I think, yeah, I don't think pulling up the ladder is the way to phrase it in good taste, but in good faith, rather, sorry. I don't know. Everyone is completely entitled to their opinion, of course. So there's no begrudging that. But yeah, I think learning from sample teams is obviously, the way to go. And again, the people who lean on people building for. Oh, that was the point I wanted to make. Yeah. There's the players who copy paste, or not even copy paste. They just copy others' teams from replays and succeed that way. But then there are the players who like literally have someone building counter teams for them. Like I've had this happen to me in tournaments where someone. This is really weird actually. I had a couple opponents in several tournaments, and there was a guy who was going around purposely giving all these players teams specifically built to face me, and I was like, why are these teams weirdly okay? That was a strange occurrence, but the matchup was and in certain instances these players didn't know the tier nearly as well, yet they had such a good matchup because of this external thing. So yes, skill floor or skill ceiling, whatever, you know what I mean, is well, I'll stop repeating myself. So yeah, thanks so much for checking this video out. I hope it gave you something to chew on, as cinema does, and I'll see you in the next one.